Well, I'm not working here to produce players for Crystal Palace to sell. I'm here trying to make certain that we've got good enough players on the field to play to help Palace win matches. I'm Roy Hodgson, I'm manager of Crystal Palace Football Club. I think education is crucial in so many walks of life, and even more so if you're going to go into a walk of life where education and coaching players, and coaching is a form of education, is going to be your raison d'etre. So I will put it at the very, very top of the list. People getting a good education and remembering, I suppose, that education doesn't necessarily stop when you walk away from your academy or your school with a diploma. If you're serious about your job and your profession, then your education never stops. I worked for 2 years with one of the very best in the business, Dr. Steve Peters, who's famous for his books that he's written on the subject. And he worked very closely with myself and with Ray Lewington and Gary Neville when we were with England. I found his insights particularly helpful. I think a lot of the players found it as well. But the thing about the psychology aspect, it is an individual thing, and it's not so easy to impose psychology on players. I think that's sometimes a bit harder, but I think in terms of an individual basis it can be of enormous benefit, and strangely enough it can be every bit as important for people who are coaching or leading as it is for those who are trying to give performances on the field on a Saturday afternoon. Well, the first thing that's very, very important is the environment. You need to create an environment which is conducive to learning and to, if you like, practicing your profession, because basically, we want people to become better players, we want them to become better team players, and to do that I think you've got to make sure you create the right environment. I think that selling ideas, convincing players of the benefits of working in the way that you as a coach or manager like to work, I think that's very, very important. And then of course, I suppose in a very vast subject, the third element which is worthy of mention is the one of respect. I think we hear a lot of that these days. It's a bit of a buzzword, but it's something I've always believed in for very long periods of time, that you need to make certain that when players come to work, they feel they're working in a respectful environment, that the confidence you place in them and the trust that you place in them, that is something that you want them to reciprocate. Because the one thing about football coaching, you need football players you can trust and rely upon. Reliability is a very, very important factor in a football player. Someone you know who's going to come to the training every day, who's going to do his best in the training every day, and when you select him to play in the team, he's going to give his best, and he's going to try and stick, if you like, to the consigns that you and the team have laid down for him to do his job on the field. Now, all these things seem like sine qua nons, but unfortunately in a sport, nothing is sine qua non. Everything has to be worked for. Well, I think you have to sort of divide that in two. I think the relationship with the owners, the chairman or the CEO, with your technical director, these are unbelievably important relationships, because these are the people really who have got the final responsibility for the football club. Keeping the club going, maintaining the legacy of the club, moving the club forward in the right direction, and they make an important decision when they appoint you as manager, because they're investing a lot of responsibility and authority in you, and they're virtually saying to you, we are trusting you to lead our club forward in the way we would like it to be led forward. So you need a good relationship with them. You need a very strong bond of communication, so that they are aware of all the things you're trying to do for the club and the thoughts that are going through your head, and they're not sitting in some ivory tower somewhere while you're in your ivory tower wondering what on earth is going on. So I think that's of vital importance. The business side, to some extent less so, but you've got to realise, I think, as a manager, that they have these enormous constraints on the business side. They have budgets to fill, they have losses and profits to take into consideration, and some of the things they might want you to do for their club in order to help keep the club afloat on a financial basis are things that you're going to need to take into consideration, because once again, we don't work in isolation. But on the other hand, I think that the job of being a football coach and a football manager should really be restricted, or as restricted as much as possible, to doing the job that you've been appointed to do, that you're being paid to do, and that is to make certain that the players that the club place at your disposal or disposition are getting the best work they can do and are going out onto the field every match day weekend in the best possible shape to get a win, because unfortunately the business of football is about winning football matches. Your sponsorships will become a lot easier if your team's a winning team. The income from the gate will be a lot better if you're winning matches and people are coming to watch you play. If you're in the Premier League, your income is going to be a lot better than if you sink down to Division 1. So all of these things are pretty obviously related. But I don't regard myself as in any way responsible totally for that. It's something that I discuss with the others, and one of the major points there will be, of course, around transfers and salaries. When players are going to either come into the club, is it right for our business model? Can we afford the players? Are we going for the right ones? Are the wages okay? And of course, with players that are going to be sold as well, should we sell, should we not sell? So as a manager, you definitely get very much caught up in this aspect, but I don't regard it necessarily as my, as a simple example. I'm not working here to produce players for Crystal Palace to sell. I'm here trying to make certain that we've got good enough players on the field to play to help Palace win matches. Well, everyone deals with setbacks badly, that's the bottom line, because there's no other way of dealing with them. You have to find a way of developing the mental strength, I suppose. You also have to find a way of developing a sense of perspective. The balance is very, very important. In sport, balance is vitally important in so many ways. It's important in terms of how you train, the teams you select, the tactics you choose, and how you balance out the players that you've got at your disposal to win matches. But it's also important, I think, in your private life. But there is no simple answer to that. I think the people who have a calmer disposition are at an advantage. I think people that have got massive outside interest that they are very passionate about have an advantage, because it isn't football and football alone that rules their world. I think the family are very, very important in that respect. People with very strong and powerful family ties can find it a little bit easier to deal with setbacks. But I think that people have to realise that if your decision is that I'm going to put all my eggs into the basket of being a full-time professional football coach, or even more so football manager, if the whole responsibility rests with you, there's going to be days, unfortunately, where you're going to be very, very miserable, or periods of your life where you're going to be very miserable, because you're going to see failure looming in front of you, and quite often that might be a failure that you think is a little bit unfair, because basically speaking, your fate is always tied up, in my case, with 11 men that I choose to put on the field. But once they go on that field, I am totally and utterly in their control, as it were, to make me a happy man on the Saturday evening or an unhappy man on the Saturday evening, and there's nothing one can do to change that. Well, it's such a difficult question, because it always goes back to the Joan Mercer that distance lends enchantment, which it does. The further you go back in time, the more magical the moment was. In terms of magical moments, it's always going to be very, very hard for me to come away from that evening in 1976 when we came back one game before the end of the season, having secured the title against all the odds, and finding our wives waiting for us at a hotel in Halmstad to sort of celebrate that evening. Everything seemed so magical at that moment in time, the late November Halmstad evening, and everyone dressed up and celebrating. But of course it's 44 years ago. There's been so many good ones, really. It's hard to say. I think what you're always hoping for is the next one, to some extent, you know, you tend to park the good ones, and every now and again to cheer yourself up or to give yourself a pat on the back or to feel good about yourself, you might revisit it. Like I'm able to revisit this moment in 1976 now thanks to your question. But I've got to say, had I not received the question, I don't think that thought would have got anywhere near my head. And I've been lucky. It's been a long career, but there have been some very, very good moments. And I think it's important that you don't bother yourself too much trying to rank them. Because sometimes the ones that will rank highest in people's thoughts are always going to be in relation to the bigger clubs or whatever. But sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's smaller moments that you'll look back on as the highlights.